Hello everybody. We're here for another webinar series. Today I'd like to introduce to you Professor Bart Van Parys here at MIT, and he's going to talk to us about some of his work here at MIT and classes that he's teaching. So Bart, could you please introduce yourself to the audience?
Okay, hi, my name is Bart Van Parys, and I am actually teaching two very related courses. So now in the fall, I teach the 15081 course, which is the Introduction to Mathematical Programming. Okay. And then in the spring course, in the spring semester, I teach the Nonlinear Optimization course, and they are very closely related. In fact, they are also very related to what I do personally as a researcher here at MIT. Okay. And so that's one of the reasons I like teaching both courses.
Can you tell us how you came about coming to MIT and how long you've been here at MIT as a professor?
Okay, so I've been here now 3 years, but not in the same position. Actually, I started as a postdoc, and for 2 years, with actually the first order of the books we use of the optimization classes, Dimitris Vertsimas. And then since 1 year, I'm an assistant professor at the OR staff group.
Mm-hmm. And what is your educational background?
So actually, I'm an electrical engineer, and I studied in Switzerland at the ETH, Zurich.
ETH, yes.
And then I came to the United States 3 years ago. So I did my formal education in Europe, and then I came here for work, essentially.
Oh, so what made you go from electrical engineering at ETH to MIT here at the OR group?
Yeah, I did actually control theory before as a PhD student, and this is, despite its name, actually very closely related to optimization. Mm-hmm. I would say it's optimization of a continuous type rather than a discrete type, maybe. And I would say that in Europe, those subjects are more classified as electrical engineering, while here they are typically embedded in OR program.
Okay. And can you talk about some of the research you're doing? Is that related to similar topics?
Yeah, so actually I try to work a little bit on the intersection between robust optimization, which is actually something that we cover in the course. Mm-hmm. So here the attempt is to make sure that if we make a decision which is optimal or has a minimal cost or a maximal value for a company, that the decision is not too sensitive to, let's say, certain peculiarities of the data that you actually feed into the program. Mm-hmm. So the idea is that, imagine if you're using historical data, if you would change one data point, that if your solution actually varies a lot, it's kind of makes sense to question the relevance of that decision because it might be very sensitive to corruption or someone trying to actively make you have to take bad decisions. And
so you get the same answer every time, no matter...
Well, maybe not the same exact answer, but you want to have something, if I vary it by most with a certain amount, my data, that the solution that I take only varies slightly. No, it doesn't jump around, or it doesn't critically depend on something that we might not know for certain.
Can you give us an example of something that you've used robust optimization for?
Yeah, one of the very nowadays that people are very interested in this type of problems is that, for example, with deep neural nets, it's very well known that if you change, let's say, your picture that you classify as a panda, if you change only a few pixels, your classifier would classify it as a dog, for instance. And this is what we call non-robust behavior. So what you ideally would like to have is that if you predict panda for one picture, then all pictures that are close, let's say that they don't differ from the original picture by more than, say, 10 pixels, then you would still like to have that being a dog. And the idea is that you can bake that into the optimization procedure by using some theory that we developed in the course. So you can require that whatever decision you make, if you vary your data a little bit, you still make approximately the same decision.
So are the applied applications for your research then mostly on AI for graphical research?
Yeah, so mostly based on research with data, because data is an example in which we actually do not know for certain whether it actually represents the true underlying phenomenon. while if you work with models, it's less applicable because there you assume that the model is sufficiently well that you can actually trust it. While with data, you have to always be a little bit skeptical. And that's where it finds its most promising applications. For example, it's used for picture classification, or when you, let's say, have a problem where you have only limited historical data, you want to make sure that, making decisions to the future, that you don't over-calibrate any decision you make on some spurious phenomenon.
Interesting. And so coming from Switzerland, we have a lot of people in the audience who may not be from the United States. Can you tell us what are the biggest differences you see in the educational system from, say, Europe to MIT here? What
I would say the main difference is how I would say that how courses are, or how people teach. I think in Europe you're more left to yourself. So the teacher is someone who teaches the course, but the student is somewhat responsible in digesting the material. While I would say in the United States, I have a feeling that professors here put more effort into actually making it so that students have an easier time maybe in absorbing the material. I think that when I was a student, my professors were very hands-off. They just
give you lectures and then there's an exam?
Yeah, exactly. For example, the idea of office hours doesn't really exist. Or for example, they would say it's before the course, you have to maybe read the chapter yourself, and then you'll just discuss maybe problems that you have in class.
I see.
In some kind of tutorial fashion.
So how do you run your classes here at MIT then? Do you have office hours?
I had maybe a little bit in the beginning a harder time adjusting to this system. So now I put a lot of effort in making drawings and kind of making everything visual that they do in class, actually get a lot of material already digested there, rather than they have to maybe first put in the work and then we just discuss some details.
Okay.
So I would say that's the major difference.
Wow.
So it's a little bit. I don't really know how to put this, but so in Europe it's more
hands-on in the United States. Well, let's talk about your class 15081 that you're teaching this semester. So can you give us an overview? The course is called Introduction to Mathematical Optimization. So can you give us a quick summary of what this class is about?
Yeah, so what I particularly like about this topic is that, and also this class in particular, is that it has three components, all of which I like a lot. So the first component is that it has a mathematically rigorous component. So it's a graduate course, and we'll bring in some theory, and we'll discuss how to prove certain theorems and so forth. But besides that being mathematically rigorous, it also has an algorithm perspective, or an algorithm component, in which we actually talk about algorithms that you can run on your computer to actually solve linear optimization problems.
Yeah.
And the third component that we also discuss, and that make everything fit very well together, is that there are a lot of applications you can model using mathematical programming, in particular the linear optimization that we discuss in class. And I think that what is nice is that the reason why this theory is so successful is that it blends these three components very well together. So we not only have theory, but also have algorithms and applications, and all comes together in essentially one course.
I see. And why would a student take this class? What would drive them to enroll in your course?
Yeah, so I would say that it's the core course for someone who wants to do an operational research or optimization-based research herself or himself.
Okay.
And one of the reasons that we discuss most of the main theory that we use in our field. So we discuss algorithms to solve these problems, like interior point algorithms and the simplex methods. And we also discuss the most important theory, that is duality theory, I would say. And without those perspectives, it would be very hard for someone to start even just reading one paper. You actually need to know this. And even for people who want to just apply it in practice, I would say it contains all the core concepts that you would actually need to know in order to apply.
So just really quickly then, on the simplex method and the duality theory,
Yes.
what does that mean exactly for the audience, and why is it important in the field of optimization?
So the simplex method is historically the first method that actually could solve linear optimization problems in a time that is acceptable in practice. And duality theory, I would say, is extremely important in that it's a, at first glance, maybe a quite esoteric theory about one way of interpreting it is how, say, the solution varies. It varies on parameters, but it has quite deep applications or deep interpretations once you actually, I say that, want to solve, for example, robust optimization problems or problems in which you want to see how the solution varies if it varies on parameter. It's, I would say that duality theory is not something that you can explain quite easily or why it is useful, but it's, I would say, it's one of the core components.
And to run these algorithms, including the simplex method, do you use a certain software in your class?
Yeah, so the software that we use is Julia. So
Julia.
It's actually a software that is open source and has roots at MIT. And one of the main advantages is that it's easy to read Julia codes. And in particular, if you want to formulate optimization problems that are predefined packages, you don't actually have to spend that much time learning any new software or actually getting to up and running.
So it's more important that you formulate it correctly.
Yeah, exactly.
Rather than running the code.
Yeah, so I expect students to be able to run these example codes that I give, or to, when they formulate the linear optimization problem, that they can actually translate it into a computer program. But the reason why we use Julia is that translation is actually very easy, or it should not take considerable effort.
Can you give an example of a homework or a problem set, an application that the students have to use to complete this a Julia algorithm? Is there anything, an example in the practical world that you can think of?
Yeah, so we have some, every year I try to come up with some example that is not in the book that they have to reformulate using an optimization approach. For example, in the last year, I used a question from probability theory in which they had to compute the worst case probability that a certain investment would make you lose money, for example. And you can formulate that as a linear optimization problem. And they had to then use Julia to actually find the numerical value of that probability when they translated it into a computer program.
Was it like a stock, or did they have to use like market data to predict that?
No, I gave that as part of the exercise, but they had to formulate the problem in such a way that they could solve it using a linear optimization.
And so you have these homeworks. Do you have exams in the class?
Yeah, so we have a late midterm.
A late midterm?
Yeah, so my hope is, well, because we have I hope most people take, well, the midterm is you have to take, but they have the choice between a project, which I hope most people will do, or you can do a final. But in order for me to make sure that they got most of the theory, I would do a late midterm in the sense of, I think it's directly after the spring break.
After spring break?
Yes.
Okay, for the spring version of the class?
Yes, exactly. Yes. And then they get to have a test on, I would say, 2/3 almost of the material, or at least the theory. And then the project is done just to make sure that they can, use the solver, they can actually formulate the problem and as a model and so forth.
So every student has to take this late midterm.
Yeah, exactly.
And then some students can do a project for their final, or they can take a final exam.
Yeah, exactly.
So what percentage of students take the final exam?
I hope as little as possible. So those are for students who absolutely can't think of any project.
Oh, okay. So not very many.
Yeah.
So now we kind of progressed into your spring semester course,
Yes.
which is nonlinear optimization.
Yes.
So how is that course different to this fall course, which is linear optimization?
So as the name suggests,
right.
It's about the nonlinear optimization problems, and some of the theory extends also to nonlinear optimization programs, at least some of them that of a specific type, so typically convex nonlinear optimization problems.
Yeah.
And we discuss how, or to what extent, the theory that we see in linear optimization actually carries over to this class of nonlinear problems as well. But we also see, for example, reasons why general nonlinear problems cannot easily be solved on a computer. So we see some, I would say, negative results as well. So some nonlinear optimization problems are so difficult that it would be, one cannot expect to solve them actually quite fast.
What kind of data sets are nonlinear optimization data sets?
So actually most problems are in the real world, I would say, typically involve some nonlinearity. Okay. Typically linear optimization models, so data itself is not nonlinear per se, it's the model in order to actually formulate your problem is typically an approximation of the problem you actually want to solve. Yes. I would claim that in many situations, neglecting that nonlinearity is not the first order effect. And in that case, solving a linear problem gives you a good approximation to the problems you actually want to solve. In some other problems, the nonlinearity is crucial. For example, in deciding whether to, for example, schedule factories, for example, which items to produce. Okay. Sometimes you have a nonlinearity in which if you don't produce any item, it is force free, but the first item might be very costly because once you have committed to producing one, you have to make an entire maybe logistic train or an entire production train. And you have a nonlinear effect. The second item that you produce might be marginally very cheap because once you have committed to this production, producing an extra item is cheap. And in that case, you have a nonlinear problem in the sense that you have to either you make it, and in that case, you incur high, let's say, offset cost or a one-time cost, or you don't.
Yeah. That might be also a step function because once you produce too many products in the factory, you might have to get another factory.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And those jumps are they are nonlinear phenomena or phenomena. And there's, of course, regimes in which you don't switch, in which the linear optimization problem is sufficient. But in general, nonlinearities occur. And it turns out that they are extremely hard to handle, at least in full generality. But some subclass of these problems, the complex ones, we are still able to solve them actually very efficiently, using almost the same methods as for linear optimization.
Also in Julia.
This is also using Julia code that I try to propose as a framework in which to solve these problems.
Can we talk about the students in your classes? Are they mainly PhD students, or would you have some master students? What is the composition?
I think these two classes are mostly graduate students. There are some occasional master students who take the course because they are undergrads that want to explore a certain topic. But the bulk of the course is typically a PhD. But that is not to say that you have to have a master in order to be able to complete the course. It's just that, especially for example, nonlinear optimization is it's a very narrow course, I would say.
Okay. And so is your research then typically with transportation and logistics related types of problems, or is this nonlinear optimization applied to areas such as healthcare or financial services?
Yeah, so the research that I do personally is more methodological. I would then, focus more on what type of algorithms can we use to solve classes of problems.
I see.
Though I have applied it to problems, for example, in logistics, where you have to decide when having, for example, a certain demand of a certain product,
Okay.
where to place, for example, warehouse and how much stock that you have to have in each one of them, for instance. But typically, I do more methodological research.
Yeah.
So I would say I'm more on the theory side of the triangle between theory, algorithms, and applications.
Okay. So just one last question before we end. Can you give any advice to students? What is your, if you were to give a piece of advice in students taking linear or nonlinear optimization, what would you tell them as your one piece of advice?
I would say that some of the, they are both courses are actually quite, I would say, hard courses to take, and that certain things they require a certain amount of digestion, and that I would say that I would suggest to kind of keep up with the course and try to at home at least, read ahead of time just to get the definitions and get the words already in your in your head, so that
before they come to class.
Yeah, exactly. I think it helps tremendously if you at least know some of the words already, that you don't have to think about, okay, what is this or what is
the
that?
Terminology.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Okay, great.
Although, of course, I know it's a big commitment, so many of them don't have that much time. But,
yes. It will help.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, there you go. That's it for today's session. So thank you, Bart, for telling us more about your linear optimization and nonlinear optimization courses here at MIT.